Great.
Callum speaking.
Can you hear me, Kevin?
Yes. Quick little. Sir Thomas, can we hear you?
Yeah.
Paul?
Yep.
Bobby?
Right here.
Callum?
Yeah, all good.
Alex? You say something?
Yeah, I can hear you. You hear me okay?
I can hear you great.
Good,
Right.
good.
Yeah, audio is looking good, which is great. So we're going to wait a little bit longer before we start. It's 11:01 on the dot. We've now got 51 registered, 128 registered, and 51 live. So I hope to get more here, which is great. Thank you all for joining us. See you, Jim Curran, Timothy Norcross, Jackie Escajade, Martine Boyce. Thank you all for joining us here. Really, it's a Monday, no better way to start the week than with a fun little discussion on virtual reality training. And again, we're just going to give it a minute here. But really, really grateful for all of you to be here today. I see Russ Herndon, Evelina Chen, Chris Smith. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for spending the time. Jim Darley, Ravi, Spencer Lewis, all of you, thank you so much for being here. So it's just a little bit past now, about almost 11:02. We'll get more people trickling in here, but I want to be mindful of time and make sure we can get going here. So I'll officially get us going here today. I am your host, Kevin Sofin, co-founder of smartfirefighting.com. Really excited here to talk about some of the interesting challenges and opportunities that the coronavirus has imposed upon not only the world, but particularly the fire service. And we have a star-studded lineup here with some of the smartest, most distinguished people that I know in the fire service. And without me butchering their intros or their bios, we're going to do a quick introduction, a little roundtable, and then jump into some of the questions and videos. So without further ado, Bobby, if you want to start and give us a little bit of about who you are and some of the work that you've done in the past and today.
Well, I'm currently the educational director for a trade show called FDIC, which is an American trade show predominantly focused on training for the American Fire Service. I also am the editorial director for Fire Engineering Magazine, Fire Rescue, Firefighter Nation, Fire Apparatus Emergency Equipment, and the Journal of Emergency Medical Services. We also run a trade show in conjunction with that called EMS Today. I began my career in the 70s as a volunteer firefighter. Did most of my structural firefighting. I was raised in New York City. Most of my structural firefighting was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I spent about 30 some odd years. Then I went to Texas, and from Texas went to the magazine industry and the trade show industry. And I'm currently a volunteer with the Limestone Fire Protection District number 2 in Wasso, Oklahoma. And we have the distinction of guarding Garth Brooks's double-wide trailer, which is actually a large palatial home, but he's our most famous resident. So still very active in the fire service and very interested in training. And I think we have a great opportunity with Tom with us to talk about how do we measure training and effectiveness, because he's done a great deal of work with that. So I'm excited to be here, and thank you for having me.
Thanks, Bobby. And Callum, you want to give a quick intro about yourself?
Yeah, good. Hello, everyone. I'm Callum Faint. I'm the Assistant Chief Fire Officer for Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Service. So I joined the service just over 25 years ago in Cambridge. I've worked my way through the ranks. Probably for the last 7 to 10 years, I've had an involvement with training in both the operational environment and classroom and theory based. I moved to Leicestershire just over a year ago. We've got 20 stations, a staff of around about 700 people. And obviously my role at the moment is delivering service across the board. So that's operational response, command and control, training. And I have just received the good news that in about 2 weeks' time, I'll also take up the role of Chief Fire Officer. So we'll have total oversight for the organisation. I work with Paul, who'll introduce himself. He hooked me about a year ago on the benefits of virtual reality. And we're now really kind of trying to push forward that in the training environment. COVID has it stimulated some awesome innovation for us, and working with Alex and River, we're kind of really making some big strides forward in how that can help us now in COVID, but actually medium to long term, there's some massive efficiencies for us, and we're starting that journey now.
Fantastic. Thanks, Callum. And now, Sir Thomas Windsor, if you want to give us a little background on who you are and some of the work that you do.
Thanks, and hello to everyone. I'm Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Fire and Rescue Services in England, and we inspect and report to the public on the efficiency and effectiveness of fire and rescue services in England. I'm also Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Constabulary for England and Wales, so we also do the same job for the police forces in England and Wales, the 43 police forces in England and Wales. I'm a lawyer for the last 41 years, but my career has been interrupted by public service. The two I've just mentioned, I used to be the economic regulator for the railway industry 20 years ago. And we are concerned with the efficiency and effectiveness of these essential public services. We're an independent authority. We were given the jurisdiction in relation to fire and rescue in 2017. We were given the jurisdiction in relation to the police service in 1856. And the rationale was that because policing and fire have so many commonalities in response times, preparedness, and culture, that it made sense for the police service and the fire and rescue service to be inspected according to the same processes and broadly the same criteria. So that's what we do. We've got a staff of about 300, and we're assessing the efficiency and effectiveness of public services that are spending about 14 to 15 billion pounds a year. So we keep on telling our sponsor government department that we're very good value.
Thank you. Next, Paul, give us some context on who you are, the work you do, and maybe even elaborate on some of that Sir Thomas and Bobby talked about with measuring this effectiveness.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for signing in to listen to this webinar. I'm Paul Spate. I'm a watch manager with Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Service, and I spent my whole career starting in 1988, so I'm 31 years and still going. I've got two references. One's road safety and the other is virtual reality. Virtual reality kind of, when I say fell into my lap about 4 or 5 years ago after making a road safety film using 360 cameras, which has gone global. It's being used in kind of road safety education, kind of basically around the world. That's when I met Alex from River at the Emergency Services Show, and after a couple of meetings and chats, we kind of started this venture for virtual reality training. And at that time, I had fire investigation as a reference, and I saw that virtual reality was just a perfect fit for fire investigation. And we've came up with a proof of concept, which we've taken around the UK. We've been lucky enough to demonstrate it at Bobby's FDIC, and the kind of the feedback we've got is absolutely excellent. And then River, they've taken it on to another level. And like I say, I've postponed my retirement to make sure that that we can push this new training of the future is what I call it, forward, so other people can see the massive benefits, the potential it's going to have, not just for fire investigation, but for most of the training we do. I think it's got a fantastic opportunity, and I think when you see some of the videos, hopefully you'll see kind of why we're all so excited about the possibilities.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul, for your leadership in this space. And last but not least, Alex gives a little context on who you are and what you do.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks for having this chat, and thanks for organising it, Kevin. It's amazing. So I'm Alex Harvey, Creative Director of River, and my background was the games industry for 10 years, working at Codemasters making racing games. So in 2014, we started the production company, looking at 360 video and room scale VR training. And it was that point that, we met Paul and started to look at fire investigation as a way of training. But we also, like we're going to touch on shortly, that soon branched out into 2 different industries, 360 video and room scale VR. So I think we're going to touch on both of those. But Paul, I'm also loving your background. That looks amazing.
I'll keep changing it.
Well, I think for a lot of the people in this chat, they might have some context on what is virtual reality, but I think we know that the first responders, especially within budget cuts of coronavirus, we're being expected to do more with less. And training is something that if, let's say, if a doctor's performing surgery on us, we would hope and expect that they have ample training. And it's not much different for first responders. They need ample training, but we have environmental restrictions, health issues, cost issues. And these are all things that drive us to rethink the way that we're training. And before we get into some videos and some specific examples, I would love to hear sort of a macro view from all of you about sort of what is virtual reality training, and how is that something that will play a role into the future of first responder training, considering the restraints we have today and what the world will look like moving forward. If Bobby, if you want to start us off, and everyone else, feel free to jump in and interrupt one another.
Well, in my thoughts, it's much like every other innovation. We had BPAD, Shoot Don't Shoot, a simple video program for law enforcement years ago on the public safety sector side, where law enforcement was taught how to identify threats and how to respond to them appropriately in a violent situation. In the military, we've had for many, many years simulations for pilots. Now we have simulations for ground-based warfighters. Everything from operating, basic handguns and machine guns and whatnot to operating MRAPs and things of that nature. So I think it's just the innovation, most growth, most progress. There's always a collection of opportunity and circumstance. And I think we're seeing that with the fire service. And the fire service has always been keenly interested in looking at events, fires and fire videos. And that's been around preceding my career, which is just a mere 48, 49 years. So, even prior to my time, my dad's dad looked at videos and photos of fires and tried to put themselves in the moment. What VR is giving us is the opportunity to really put yourself in the moment, so to speak. And now with all of our fire dynamic simulation programs, with the vast amounts of data that we're gathering on the fire ground through various instrumentation, we can recreate so much of that. Take that even a bit further to just basic learning, where we need to do sets and reps, and in order to build muscle memory, in order to build confidence with certain types of tools and apparatus, for our British listeners, hand tools and tools for my American compatriots. The idea is that now we can do it without having to have live fire. Now we can do it without having to use a vast amount of physical resource, because the VR can put us in that moment and reconstruct with other tools much of that environment. The other part of it, I think, is our growing knowledge of toxicology and our susceptibility as humans to environmental hazard, whether it be heat, whether it be smoke, whether it be all kinds of insult. This can be almost, we used to call it toxic free, but I would take it even further to where it's non-life-threatening training, which I think is critical going forward for all of us to consider. And environmentally, it just makes tremendous sense. And plus, it also enables us to wrap together multiple communities in a single platform, irrespective of the distance of those communities, right? So you could have, if you're a large department, you could have men and women operating in hundreds of kilometers away from one another, and still yet nonetheless seamlessly talk, integrate, see and experience the same thing at the same time. So I think that we're on the precipice of what's going to be a tsunami of growth in this particular field. And my hat's off to and I apologize, I always butcher I always try to think of Worcestershire sauce to say Worcestershire. Probably about the stupidest thing I've ever said on tape, but my hat's off to what you are doing. I think it's a landmark move, and I believe it's being emulated aggressively across the states currently, although not as sophisticated with the ARVR.
I butcher it all the time, but it's Leicestershire.
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 I got it.
So I think just building on what Bobby said, and I'll struggle to articulate it quite as well as he's done. From a practical point of view, VR and 360 video opens up the worlds of possibility for us. So traditionally, firefighters are trained on experiencing situations, scenarios, events, and then you build your experience up as you go through operational incidents. We've been slightly a victim of our own success here, of actually a number of operational incidents are really happily declining. So therefore, the experiential learning our firefighters get is limited to what they actually see and do themselves. So if we're able to capture some of these experiences, some of these scenarios, or at least recreate them in the most realistic way we can do, it's not just the 1, 2, or 5 or 10 firefighters that attend the scene that gather that experience. We can then upload that, insert people into that experience, and that learning becomes so much more powerful. And actually we can recreate it not once, not twice, but 100, 150, 2,000, however many times you want to recreate it. And you're putting the firefighters into that experience, which actually, when you start looking at learning styles and techniques, those visual learners, actually it's going to make a real memory imprint on them. And it will be a very different kind of training environment. Certainly building on Bobby's point as well around the learning in that safe environment. If you take the explain, demonstrate, impersonate and practice EDIP method of training, actually you can take people through a live fire scenario, but pause it and explain it, allow them to demonstrate it, get them key core training functions done in a really good way in a safe environment, and then move them on to the impersonate and practice. So it will never replace live fire training. It will never replace that live scenario training. But actually, it really gives us the power to kind of do a lot of the stuff, a lot of the pre-work in a really immersive environment to get people ready to face the difficult stuff. So that's really good. I think also on a more practical level, the virtual classroom holds so much potential for fire and rescue services. So instead of sending one trainer out to 20 stations and 40 watches or shifts, actually they can just remotely dial into a live classroom event, receive that training from a highly qualified and specialist instructor, but actually receive it in almost what would feel like a one-to-one environment or a real live environment. So I have to say, from either a live fire or a live exercise training scenario, it allows us to evolve and develop our staff in a really effective way. But actually, even some of the less glitzy stuff, some of the more theoretical based input, it allows them to have the direct contact with the trainer. So actually, we're relieving a load of pinch points on our trainers, because instead of delivering to a classroom of 10 to 12 people, whatever the optimal number may be for that session, actually you could have 200, 300 people all dialed in virtually, but feel like they're almost receiving one-to-one training. So that's where I really think that the benefits, I've rambled on compared to what Bobby did, and a bit more unpolished, but actually the power of it's really promising, that I can't stress it enough. That's where I think it has massive benefits.
Yeah, I agree with that. And on the point that Bobby mentioned earlier, was that airline pilots have been training in simulators for years, and the main reason is you can't put a trainee in a plane above ground, because if it goes wrong, unfortunately people get hurt and die. So you train them in the most safest environment possible, and virtual reality gives us that environment to training. And another point that Bobby said, what it does as well, it's a sterile environment. There's no risk of contamination from any fireground contaminants, whether they're carcinogens or toxins. It's completely safe for the individual to train. It helps with the muscle memory. They get the learning and the procedures correct. And then, as Callum said, when they've got that right, then they go to do the training for real. And the training is far more beneficial, because they've made all the mistakes in the virtual world. So they get far more kind of out of the training when they go there. The kind of, I wouldn't say the pinch point, but one of the barriers tends to be sometimes the instructors are a little bit reluctant, because the virtual reality training is new and something completely different to what they're used to. And they're a little bit scared, some of them, that it may take over what they do, but it won't do. It's going to enhance what they do and make their job far more easier, because when they get the trainees, they're ready to put the BA sets on, or they're ready to go into the fires.
Paul, just one point of correction. you can put a pilot into a plane the first time without training, but only once.
Yes. Unless they're very good.
Just touching on repetition, you touched on repetition and consistency. It was interesting because we talked to recently, Sir Thomas, we spoke to Skills for Justice, who look at accreditation behind things. And they were saying that it's very interesting that we can now replay a scene completely as it was before, because one of their requirements is to make sure that the scene is consistent to the previous one that was accredited against. So I think that's a massive point for me, that the accreditation bodies need to see the capabilities of the VR to understand how it is completely repeating the scene. It's completely consistent because you just press a button and reset the whole thing.
And to that point, Alex, and I can't wait to hear from Tom, not only can we recreate something specifically, we can add nuances, we can add something additional or change something, because that's when real learning happens. One of the big problems we have with mental models, as discussed by Ensley and Woods and everyone else ad infinitum, is that the model only tells you what's true for the model. It doesn't tell you what might be true for a similar situation with something slightly different about it, which I think is where this tool, and especially remember as we're talking here, we're not talking about watching a video screen. We're talking about immersive, I can't wait to see some of the videos you're going to play, but immersive technology that makes you feel as if you are in the actual event. It's that added element of VR that has such power.
I think we're luckily with everyone in this group. I think everyone has actually had a go on that investigation and stuff. So they do. Yeah, you've seen the interactive.
Yeah, if I may come in, endorse everything that's been said, of course. Our interest is, of course, ensuring that firefighters are trained in the most efficient and effective manner, and that they get the maximum benefit out of it. I first saw this, and Paul was kind enough to demonstrate it, and I was so keen to my experience in Leicestershire when I was visiting and had that demonstration was that I asked Paul and Alex to come to London and to demonstrate it to quite a range of my headquarters staff, all of whom were enormously impressed. The benefits are, as have been said already, and the safety of the training is of enormous importance. The practicality in terms of space, in terms of the number of people you can get to, and of course in terms of the very low cost of this kind of training. I don't want to put Alex out of business, but this is really cheap compared to pretty much any other kind of training I've ever come across, where you're dealing with a practical situation. Putting on that headset and looking around was something that I had never experienced in this kind of context. And I'm not a gamer, so I wouldn't know. But the efficiency and effectiveness of this kind of training cannot be overstated. And it is also, of course, adaptable to any kind of first responder training. So the first time I saw it was a road safety example. And it may be, Paul, that you're going to show us the road safety one, are you?
Not tonight. We've got some fire investigation tonight.
Okay, all right. But never, the road safety one was, it was a bunch of teenagers going along in a car, and you felt you were there. You were in the car. You just look around and you can look wherever you like. And then a farm vehicle comes from outside from a side road. The kids are larking about. They're going too fast. They're not paying proper attention. There's a collision, and then there's a sort of a few seconds of blackness, and then the reality of the situation is there. One of the kids has gone straight through the windscreen and he's dead, or he's almost, he's dead. Others are very severely injured, etc., etc. And it is the most extraordinary thing. And I know that Paul and others have taken this and shown it to a lot of what in America are called high school kids, secondary school children. just to, in 5 minutes, they get an idea of something that they could never have explained to them in any better way than that. So then I saw it in the context of firefighting, and I have to say, I knew it was virtual reality, but there was no way I was going to take a step out of an open window into the open space. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And none of my colleagues could bring themselves to do it. And, you know, you're able to go and pick things up and turn them around and look at them and so on. The only thing you can't do is smell them, which is probably just as well, just in a, you know, firefighting situation. So the recommendation I've made to Paul and Alex and colleagues in Leicestershire is that, and it may be Paul and Callum and Alex can tell me this, that you've got to show it to the ministers, the cabinet politicians who are going to be making decisions in relation to fire budgets and police budgets. And of course, there's also an application in terms of the health service. In other words, all first responders. It is an enormously impressive tool. Its adaptability and practicality are almost limitless. And if you show them to the principal decision makers in politics, because they're the people who give you the money, whether it's on a local basis, the local mayors, or whether it's on a national basis, and of course our system of government is very different from yours, that is the way to get your hands in their pockets.
Yeah, what was really, sorry, what you said there, Sir Thomas, which I think is absolutely fantastic. The road safety video, it was 3 years ago when you watched that, and you've gone through it perfectly. It just shows it's created a memory. And that's what this training does, it creates a memory. So, you know, that is a fantastic endorsement of how it works.
Have you shown it to ministers yet?
Tom, you raised a wonderful point, because that video is not just critical for high school students and others to understand roadway concerns, but for firefighters, one of the things that we need to work on is building up our mental health capability. In other words, our ability to face critical situations where we're going to see and observe things which are beyond description, beyond imagination. But with AR, we can recreate those, and we can subtly indoctrinate our folks, not so that they become callous or immune to emoting at those events, but so that they're not suddenly confronted with something in the real world which could be so overwhelming, especially a roadway accident where innocent lives are suddenly, shattered, which can be devastating. And so from a mental health perspective, even, we can take this training and allow our brave men and women who are willing to put themselves and expose themselves to this kind of risk, and get them even better prepared, if you will. Because I think that's a part of our training, and I understand stress inoculation and all that type of stuff that's going on, but I think the more subtle training sometimes has more importance down the road. In other words, we're going to find so much benefit from virtual reality that's amazing. I do know that Kevin highlighted a question. Kevin, did you want us to address certifications versus?
Yeah, I mean, no time like the present. I want to show some videos here, but let's talk through some of these questions that came in from the audience, if possible. Bobby, which one were you referring to? There's two.
Well, Ravi put out a great question, and he has governmental bodies, and with Tom here, I think this is a great point. He's talking about the difference, Tom, between certification and free training. And some fire departments, especially here in the States, we have what's called authority having jurisdiction. So should a firefighter obtain some free training, as a training officer, I can look at it and with some discretion award a certain amount of credit, if you will, recognition, if you will, to that training without it having been officially certified by a governing body as to being a certificate of training. So there are certain trainings that we have that in our medical world especially that are highly regulated by various agencies. And that has to be certified, qualified, registered qualitatively. And then we have a certain amount of discretion. So I think that to Robbie's point, at least here in the States, we have a certain amount of discretion, but we also have very strict accountability for other specific aspects that have to be done in a very defined and measured way. And I'm not sure how that correlates on the British side.
Broadly, there's the certification, which is of enormous importance, but you don't need to be doing all of it certified in terms of just having the actual experience and getting the immersion that you have in the experience, because that's the thing that's it seems to me of greater value. Of course, there are authorizations that have to be passed, but everything I've seen would certainly pass every authorization of which I'm never aware. So it's a very great importance. I take your point about the mental health of the first responders, because the effect on those people, and I and Alex are probably the least qualified to speak about this, is undoubtedly very, very severe indeed.
Yeah, sorry, what you mentioned, Bobby, about exposure, kind of emergency first responders and blue light workers, when they come across a road traffic collision for the first time, if they've not seen some of the scenes that we see, it can be very detrimental to their mental health. It can impact that incident because they may become, for a few seconds, possibly not any use to anybody on that scene till they recompose themselves. There's a university in Australia, and I can't think of the name at the moment, who use our road safety film. They train paramedics, and they use it to expose paramedics to possible injuries from a road traffic collision, so they can see what it looks like if someone's broken the leg and the theme is kind of poking through, so they can see it, get used to it. And I don't think you ever really do get used to it, but accept it. So when they see it for real, they are still working at the top level, and there's not them few seconds of indecision why they kind of have to accept what they've just seen. So virtual reality that does give you a great opportunity to expose people to minor through to serious injuries in a controlled environment.
So I think now we have a couple different videos, and I think it's important for the audience to know there are many different types of training content and different ways to consume and distribute that content. And what we're talking about here is not all the virtual reality technology that exists, but it is stuff that's being used. So what I want to show you here is a little bit of a case study of how Leicestershire Fire Service, I think I said it right, is using this. And Paul, it's about a 2-minute video. And Paul just left the room as I was about to tap his shoulder. But it is a 2-minute video that goes into what is this technology. And Callum and Alex, maybe you could give a little context, but I know it doesn't have audio, so I'm going to play it. You guys can all see kind of what the content looks like, and we can continue a discussion about what it is and how it works. So I'm going to play this video. I'm going to start from the beginning really quick. Here we go.
Yeah, so I can see the videos. Everyone see it okay? Kev, you got it okay?
Yep. So if you want to explain kind of what's going on there, Alex.
Yeah, so we're looking at one of the burn containers from River Investigate. I'm not sure, so Thomas, if this is the one that you went in or not, but this is, I think, a video that Paul has captured. Looking at the tool belt above our head, we see the torch. Some of these things might be new as well, but this is all using photogrammetry, and it's allowing you to investigate the scene. Paul's, I think, showing the torch here, and then he's going to go through the. So this is the evidence marker, allowing you to place it down and take a photograph. I guess, Paul, you can take over now.
Yes, what it was, when the trainee comes into this room, he sees that lovely burn pattern on the wardrobe, then he sees the burnt debris there. He gets his torch to have a better look at it, and he thinks that area's got some interest, so he puts a number against it, takes a photo as he starts his kind of investigation. So what he's done, he's gone through the scientific kind of process. It's the process of elimination. He's eliminated all possible causes bar one, which is possibly ignitable liquid. So he needs to bring in the hydrocarbon dog to count or discount that as a possible cause. And so we give the trainee the opportunity to bring the dog in. The dog's not indicated at all there. It's a quick look round. Then instructor gives them a thorough look. The dog's got no interest in that area, so we can safely say that we can discount ignitable liquid as a possible cause. But they still need to come up with a cause. The trainee's thinking, it's possibly a naked flame applied to some material. So what we like them to do is go back in and have another look, and we say have a good look round, because there are other causes which may kind of come into play. If you look up there, what he's looking at now is the curtain rail. What has happened, the fire's come across the ceiling, set fire to the curtains at the top. The weight of the curtains have dropped down, so you've got flaming curtains drop into that corner there and carry on burning, which gives you that V pattern. And a lot of people look at that and seem to think it's a second seat of fire. It is, but it's caused by drop down of burning material, not a second ignition from like a person or person's unknown. So that is a really good piece of training which is in that scene, and it's very, very difficult to replicate.
And
that wasn't
video
staged.
I can play, just so you can keep talking and giving the example of this particular
significant burning. More so to the right-hand side of the sofa. We open the door.
Oh, we've got a voice on this one, have we?
Standing the threshold. You can see now we've got a lounge scenario. Confirm.
So I'm gonna play the video. It's only a minute long.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna play the audio too.
Consuming the top and taking all the back casing off the door. This has been a well-developed, fueled fire.
Actually,
to the left has been.
Sorry about that. I'm gonna try that one more time, really quick.
Significant burning more. Significant burning more so to the right-hand side of the sofa. To the right-hand side of the sofa. So we open the door. And we're just standing the threshold, and we can see now we've got a lounge scenario. The state of the fire within the compartment. The state of the fire within the compartment. It's been completely involved in fire, consuming the top and taking all the back casing off the door. This has been a well-developed, fire. See the table to the left has been tipped over on its side. See the table to the left has been tipped over on its side. And again, we can have a closer look. Materials lying around on the floor. At the materials lying around on the floor. Looking at the back of it. Examining it. Looking at the back of it. And if you look at the back, we've got little popper bags. Stuck to the back of these. So again, potentially evidential items of something being stored in this area. You can also search this area for anything else. That might be of interest to us. Computer and everything is as it is. Computer and everything is as it is. On the desk hasn't moved. Again, looking at the armchair, significant damage to the armchair.
What's great about these scenes is people say, why are you using a torch? What tends to happen at a fire scene, we isolate all the services. So there is no electricity. So we need to have a torch, we need to have scene lighting. And that's what we have the ability to do within these scenes, is bring our own scene lighting in. We've got our own torch, we've got marker plates, we've even got the cameras so you can look at your photos. You can print the photos off, and you've got a dictaphone to take notes, so you can do a full report and actually finish it and hand it over to your BA instructor and your fire investigation instructor, and they could look at it when they've got time and say, that's fantastic, you've done a great report, send it back with one or two kind of comments. You don't need to send your trainees to a training centre for a lot of these courses now, so logistically there's a savings of money in sending people away.
And I think, Paul, that was a big point. And if anything, kind of the rest of the crew, kind of what other thoughts did you have as you look at that content and what that type of training capabilities allow you to do? What does that mean for the UK and US and World Fire Service with that ability to train on that style of content?
So I think to answer that question, we have to kind of look at how that training is currently delivered. And ultimately, I can only speak for the UK, I can't speak for the US, but in the UK, you go to a specific training centre and you set fire to a container, and then you send the fire investigators in. So as we saw in the video, people were picking things up, looking at things. That scene then can't be replicated. You can only really put one or two fire investigators through that scene before everything is moved, and it won't make sense to the next person coming in. Whereas the virtual reality, you can run that as many times as you like, because you're able to put the items back in exactly the same place and give that very self-same scenario or learning to every candidate that goes through it. Equally, at the end, you're able to understand how they've done it. You've seen what they've done, so you can evaluate their level of input and training. And I don't know the exact cost of each burn scene, but you're probably looking in the region of a few £1,000s per burn scene. And actually, you only need one burn scene and you can educate 50, 60,000 fire investigators from it, as opposed to 2 or 3, maybe 4 fire investigators per burn scene. So the efficiencies in the economy of scale is much better. Plus the evaluation and the assessment of individuals is higher quality because you can actually get them to talk through it, understand it, and you know they've gone into a unique and an uncompromised scene. So that, from my perspective, is certainly with fire investigation, it's the real power of clean quality assessments, and it's completely replicatable. You can use it loads of times.
So Thomas, you mentioned that earlier in terms of how do we truly find the quantitative and qualitative measures of this type of training. And I think as Callum just touched on, from the reducing the health exposure, the economic aspects, and along with the environmental restrictions, what are some of your thoughts in terms of how VR allows us to train more, but also really get the measurements to determine the ROI and the effectiveness of the training effort?
Well, it's early days in terms of the return on investment, but I think it's perfectly plain, without quantifying it, it's perfectly plain that the economy of this approach, and therefore the efficiency with which this training can be delivered, is many times what it would have been, as Callum just said, many times what it would, what the alternative would be. So we are, as part of our inspection regime, putting in an assessment of the extent to which a fire and rescue service is using virtual reality in order to train their staff. And of course, if they're not using it, and given its wide availability, because Leicestershire have been extremely generous with the technology. I mean, sometimes I wonder whether or not you could make a lot more money out of it. But very generous with the technology. The real question on efficiency and effectiveness at this stage is, if you're not using it, what are you doing to train your firefighters that doesn't cost any more than this? And of course, the answer is nothing.
Yeah,
so,
I think
the quantification in terms of money, it's early days, but the value of it is perfectly apparent.
When we talk about effectiveness, Sir Thomas, another thing that we've added recently is the ability to have the multiplayer version.
Yes.
So now Paul can be in Leicestershire, you can be in London, and you can now be inside the same scenario together, talking and passing objects to each other. So when I think about Skills for Justice and different accreditation bodies, I think that in the future they'll be able to jump into the scenarios virtually and do the accreditation with the person as if they're there on site with them.
That is wonderfully efficient.
Yeah, I just think it's the whole system. Callum kind of touched on it with our fire investigation at the moment. We train with Derbyshire, which is about 45 minutes an hour down the road, and we put approximately 150 officers through level 1 fire investigation training. So they'll travel to Derby. We can do that now in Leicestershire on station. They can still go to Derby virtually and be in the scene with the instructor and perhaps 2 trainees and instructor, and go through a complete scenario. And once they've done that scenario, done the training, finished, you press reset, everything goes back perfect for the next trainee. At the moment, we go through the container, and as Callum said, you can't move anything because you've got perhaps another dozen courses. So the best course is the last course because you can actually do a proper thorough investigation. So I think our training is slightly flawed. Although it's very good, it's slightly flawed. Where virtual reality gives us the ability, everyone does exactly the same training. There's no disparity between the training because it's exactly the same. And the beauty is when they've done the training and they've come up with their hypothesis, the cause, the great thing is we allow them to watch the video of the fire starting and developing and spreading to see if they're right.
And building on Paul's point there as well, yes, they all get the same training, the same video, the same instruction, but actually they can do it at a time that's convenient for them. So it may be if you're on a station or at a firehouse, you can do that training at night when you haven't got other pressures of community safety. You can remain operationally available throughout this, and if you get interrupted, you just go back into the training at a later time that's convenient. So when it comes to it almost opens the door to 24/7 training. If that fits the people and the need, it reduces the reliance on going to a training centre, which is traditionally only open Monday to Friday. So it kind of really opens the door to learning when the students are ready to learn and want to learn.
I think, and I'm just sorry, it's just coming to my mind. I think, so Thomas, you asked a question earlier about have we demonstrated this to the ministers? We've not. I think the only minister who has had a go with it was the MP Nick Hurd a couple of years ago. But actually nothing come of that, and he was really impressed with it.
Without breaching any confidences, leave that with me, Paul. We've got some irons in the fire, and I've made contact with the minister.
The minister will do this. There's no question about it. And the Home Secretary as well. I have no doubt at all.
So we have two other videos and some other questions. One is on another that shows the other 360 video classroom, and it's from the RSA in the UK. So I want to show that video. It's about 2 minutes long. I just want you guys to see it. It shows a little bit of the ability to create content, consume it, and distribute it in other ways. So I'm going to play that video. I'm going to mute myself so I don't have any of that feedback. We're going to watch that really quick, and then we'll have a little bit of chat about what we saw and then how that can be deployed other places.
I'm Staff Sergeant Panoro, and I'm the QGI simulation here at the Royal School of Artillery. As part of my job, I visited ITEC in Stockholm and came across River, where we saw the capabilities of the classroom in a box. After that, we arranged a meeting where they came and demonstrated it to a wider audience here at the RSA. So the reason we were looking at Riverlink is to enable the instructors to create more immersive lessons very simply. The benefit of using Riverlink is the software itself is so simple, it would take 10 minutes to learn how to use, and then you'd be able to create your own lessons with a camera and then upload it onto the headsets, and then you've got another lesson. So here at the RSA, we're always looking at ways of innovating training, and this is one of the most innovative ways of training that we've seen recently, and we are fully behind using this. This is where we see our future lessons going, more immersive and instructor friendly to help them quickly create new lessons. We've already got loads of taskings lined up to utilise Riverlink. We're excited to see the feedback that we get and the sort of benefit that the courses and the individual lessons get from utilising this new training tool.
Kevin, I was just going to give a bit of context to the video, if you want me to.
Yeah, please.
So the Royal School of Artillery are using the software because they've been shooting their own content. So these guys, for sort of the last 18 months, have been trained by us, and they've got their own internal department now for videography capture. So they go out and record their training scenarios, then bring them back to the classroom on the same day, upload the videos to the boxes, and then show them to the trainees. And I think Callum and Paul can probably talk about it more because they're going to be doing the same thing. Those guys, Paul's been filming for years, but now there's multiple things in the pipeline. I think they were at the Fire Service College today talking about a future video. Just quickly, 360 video is 3 degrees of freedom, and the stuff we saw a minute ago was 6 degrees of freedom. So they're two different types of VR.
And I think just one point I want to make there that I think is important with virtual reality training is to make it contextual and relevant to the student. And that is something that some of the different graphics, and particularly 360 video, allows you to quickly, easily, and cheaply make content that's tailored around your grassroots needs. So that is one thing that I wanted to make you all aware of, that anyone with a 360 video camera can now create some of their own content that's relevant to them. Callum, I saw you were about to say something.
Yeah, so just building from Alex's point. So unfortunately, COVID has hindered us a little bit, and it set us back a few months. But we're taking 40 firefighters down to the Fire Service College on the 2nd of September, where we're going to have two live fire and technically challenging operational incidents of quite a big size, to be honest. And yes, those 40 firefighters that are going down will get some great experience. But Paul and Alex from River are also going to come down, and we are going to film that in 360. I'll let Paul talk about the technical complexities of it, so that actually we're moving it away from that fire investigation environment that obviously the video we've seen to a much more operational and everyday environment. And I think as well, I think it's fair of me to say, the scene will play out how the scene plays out. The operational commander on the ground will command it as they want to and as they see fit. And they won't do it perfectly. I'm sure they'll do it very, very well, but they won't do it perfectly. But actually, the value will come in replaying that footage various along the lines with different commanders of different firefighters, asking them to critically analyse what went on, what would they do differently. And because they'll be viewing it through the 360 headset, actually, hopefully they'll get some of that experiential learning. Subject to that going well, we've got quite an extensive programme planned of how we want to evolve that further down the line. We've already got Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire willing to send resources down to help us with that and kind of build some of that joint emergency services, certainly cross-border working. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say or not, but I probably will. We spent a bit of time down in the capital recently talking to the hierarchy of London Fire Brigade, who are really, really excited by this, and I know want to use this kind of technology to help them post Grenfell Tower and really kind of deliver high quality and large training throughout their organisation of 6,000 firefighters very, very quickly. If it hadn't have been for COVID, we would have done at least one high-rise scenario in Leicester. Unfortunately, the venue had to be pulled from us. So we'll adapt and overcome to that, but we're really working hard to make VR become everyday training. So really exciting couple of months for us, actually, where I think we will influence and shape the way fire and rescue services can train. Paul, I don't know if you want to add any more to that, being the person who's actually doing all the work.
Yeah, I think, you know, I believe we're just opening the door and showing other fire services what the possibilities are, because to me, virtual reality, the possibilities are endless. It's as big and as broad as your imagination. The stuff we're going to be doing down at the college next week, the crews are going to get some fantastic kind of training out of it. The incident commanders will get some really good training, and as Callum said, it will play out as a real incident. You know, they will get a tip out sheet and they'll turn up at the incident. If they take a long time to respond, the fire is going to get worse because it's a real fire. We're going to film it as best we can from all different angles. We will possibly have a sacrificial camera we'll put in the room of origin where it quite possibly melt, but you know, through experience, you know, the memory cards tend to survive, so we'll get some really great footage. And as Callum said, if it's not 100% perfect, and which it possibly won't be, what better way to learn than to your whole watch, say 5 of them put the headset on and the incident commander or the watch manager sits there with the tablet and they just talk through it and they go, okay, we weren't at that incident, what would we do? We've turned up that, what would we do? And it just promotes the discussion, and they can say, we'd do that, oh, that's what they've done, you know. And I'd imagine most of it would go down pretty much the same line. But if there's something not right, what a fantastic learning point. You know, they did that, we'd have done this, I wonder what the outcome would have been.
And Paul, on that point, and I want to ask everyone else on kind of just the point of learning. I mean, I think sometimes we are maybe punished or maybe we lose points on our tests for getting something wrong, but training is when we're supposed to mess up and scrape our knee a little bit and learn. But, you know, Bobby, I know you've led a lot of the training throughout your career, and Sir Thomas, some of your insights, but what is, when, and I maybe should have asked it at the beginning, but what is our objective with training here to kind of pull us together? I mean, when we're looking at the training, I mean, why is it that VR allows us to train in a way that we haven't been able to train before?
Well, I'll jump in first, Tom, if you don't mind. I think that VR allows us to increase person's experience base in a much more dynamic and a much more impactful way. In other words, training is about increasing your experience base, your familiarity, so that you create, as Klein called it, more slides for those of us on this call, maybe with the exception of Alex, more slides in the slide tray. Alex, for you, would be more slides in the PowerPoint presentation. But the whole idea about knowledge is basically a combination of study and experience, right? So you have the cognitive side, you have the experiential side. What VR does is it makes that experience much more robust. What we believe, and I think this will be measurable maybe decades from now, that the fidelity of that experience directly impacts its value. So one of the things, I took a few notes, and to answer a few questions as to certification and all of that, I think that for here in the States, it's Pro Board, it's IFSAC, it's other groups, it's usually with the testing. But the testing with VR will have consistent fidelity, as Paul has said several times. But what's more important to me as a trainer, and this will go back to a quick story, the Buncefield fire was reproduced by a group of researchers for the federal government here in the United States. And Dr. Woods, if you Google Dr. Woods Buncefield fire, you'll see him and a group of other researchers. What they wanted to do is recreate that fire and test incident commanders. And we're talking about certification incident commanders. What they found was, what they were testing was the introduction of technology, right? And the technology they introduced was drone footage and how that would affect the decision-making process. And as technologies become more and more invasive, pervasive, accessible, we tend to introduce them without really preparing our systems for how that's going to impact the decision-making process. And I think that's very critical. And if we're going to create, and what they found with the drone, just very quickly, was that it completely disrupted the decision-making process to the point to where 7 incident commanders were virtually paralyzed in managing that event, who were excellent, thoroughly vetted, completely competent, and had they used their normal resource channels that were coming to them, they would have done well, but they obsessed literally over the drone footage. And then there's a lot to unpack in that. I'm just going over the 360-degree deal. But how could VR help us to do that? We could introduce new technologies. We could introduce, as our air packs continue to evolve, with location devices, with sensors that can give us readouts on different gases and such. How we manage those inputs can then be evaluated through AR, VR in a much broader and a much more dynamic sense, making for much more not only impactful training, but useful training, because we can see how the human reacts to that input, which heretofore has only been able to do in real life, where the skin in the game component, to steal from Talib, is so extreme that failure is too costly, if that makes sense to you. So, and I'm sorry to go into so many different paths, but I made a few notes, and I thought that was really important. To your camera survivability, please contact Dan Magikowski and Steve Kerber at UL. They have melted thousands of cameras, and they've come up with 100 different ways to try to protect your equipment. I'll be happy to share that with you before you start using cameras willy-nilly.
We should definitely look at that, Paul, because I wasn't at the meeting today, unfortunately, but it looks like you've discussed burning a camera without me, so that sounds like a fun conversation.
I knew it'd upset Scott.
Sir Thomas, you're muted right now. If you could unmute. It's the top left blue. There you go.
Sorry. Just from my point of view, I endorse all that's been said, but the adaptability and the economy of this is enormous, and the ability to test incident commanders across a whole range of different scenarios is, of course, of enormous importance to see not only what are their decision-making processes are, but also their reaction times, and improve those reaction times. Everyone in the world knows about the Grenfell Tower fire, which London Fire Brigade were just not ready for, and indeed questionable whether anybody could have been ready for it. So the VR enables fire departments not only to train people for what they're likely to see, but also to train people for what they are not likely to encounter. If God forbid that there be any fire like Grenfell anywhere in the world again, but there will be, and the firefighters who are facing those conflagrations are better prepared they can possibly be, even though the probability of this thing happening is remote. The more lives that will be saved. So I can't say often enough just how strongly we at the inspectorate are behind the VR technology and its widespread dissemination into everything, not just fire, but all the first responders, the military, and anything else.
With the incident command training, because that, again, that they're looking to progress that into the virtual world to make it more immersive. But things like that, if you look at, you mentioned reaction times, but if we look at measuring your body's physiology, your heart rate, your blood pressure, your kind of respiratory rate, and you're going through a training scenario, and for 80% of that scenario you're perfect. 20%, all of a sudden your decision making's gone downhill, there's been a blip. If you're measuring the person's kind of heart rate, respiratory rate, you can look back on the timeline, see what happened at the incident. It could have been someone appeared at a window out of the blue and they've panicked for 20 seconds, the decision making's gone downhill. What you do then, okay, that 20% is why you're going to have a little bit of a learning package to go away, a bit more study and come back. What you do, instead of giving them that to study, you give them that, because what you've done, you've then tailor-made that training specifically for the individual. So training becomes more to the individual than to, as it is kind of now, it tends to be a kind of, everyone gets the same, if you kind of understand my meaning.
I think just building on this, I noticed the chat going on at the side, and to kind of cover some of those points off, I think we've talked about fire because obviously we're fire professionals and it's very dear to our heart. But ultimately, if you wanted to take that into the EMS world, you literally just film the different content, and actually everything else just kind of follows the same path. You could film some of the rarer medical procedures, difficult, more technical things. Paul, you're pulling a face. Is my mic funny?
Oh no, I kind of lost my screen and I'm like, oh, what have I done now? Sorry.
But I think ultimately it has the power to educate in whatever you want it to by doing different filming. There was one question around how is it translated from VR or IR into the real world. We run some fire development scenarios where traditionally you have a specific container box where you sit 10, 12 recruits in front of the fire and watch it develop. And you have to try and communicate with those recruits to look at certain things or talk to them through breathing apparatus, which is incredibly ineffective. Whereas actually, if you take them through fire development in 360 video, you can be talking directly into their ears, directing them exactly what to look at, and actually they start building that recognition, whether it's recognition prime or whatever, they start building those things. When you then move them into the real firebox, and they notice the differences, so they notice the increase in heat, because obviously you don't recreate the heat in VR, but actually they're already looking at the fire development, they're already seeing the signs and symptoms and what they need to do and understanding it, but they're picking up on the different things that we haven't created in VR. So I said it earlier, VR isn't the solution to training, it is part of the toolbox that you use to get people up to then the real environment. So it will never replace everything entirely, but it's an incredibly powerful tool to start people down that track and to replicate that over and over again in an effective and efficient way. Hopefully that's picked up on a few points. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in after me.
No, thank you, Callum. And frankly, we are a little bit past the hour here, and I think we could keep this conversation going for another hour or 2 hours. But I do want to be mindful of all of your time that you've given us today, of all the speakers as well as everyone that's still in the room. So to kind of wrap this up, I'd love if everyone wanted to give sort of a final little tidbit of knowledge, maybe some type of insight, wisdom, a challenge of sorts about everything going here. So kind of as I started with the intros, but Bobby, if you want to maybe start us off with some final thoughts, words of wisdom to leave us off here today, we'd all appreciate that.
Yeah, I would say that we're going to find out a great deal about the applicability of this technology as time goes forward. And I would caution all of us to be open to the innovation, right? The different paths that may go down, and to try to get it into as many hands as possible. The other thing I think we should keep in the back of our heads is with all technologies, as more proof Moore's law, it's going to become more affordable, more portable, more connected. as we go forward. And I think that is going to really open up just a myriad of opportunities for us. So I think that when we're talking about AR and VR, we've been looking at instant commanders, but as someone mentioned in the question box, apparatus operators, EMS operations, high tech events, whether it's confined space or rope, all of those things are going to happen. And to one other point, I have seen demonstration with VR to where the nozzle had reaction and the bunker gear had warming capability. So the fidelity of these things is going to just increase exponentially. And that's very important, because when we talk about a sudden increase in heat for no apparent reason, that's the number one indicator of flashover that those who've been fortunate enough to survive it have all reiterated. Visual cues are very rarely. It's always suddenly it got so hot, we couldn't understand why. Next thing we know, we were engulfed in flames. And so I'm very excited about it. I think that River's done a wonderful job. Thank you for having me on today. And I think that I can't wait to see what the digitally native folks are able to do with this, because I'm not, obviously. I would call a seasoned member of this panel. And as a seasoned member, I wish I could have had my hands on this when I was running the training field, 30 years ago, because the capability to expose people to things hundreds of times in a day or thousands of times in a week, and have people be able to do it on their own time is just, as Sir Thomas has laid out for us, so economically powerful, because heretofore to do that required, in our language, hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment. And now to produce it once, we can replicate it indefinitely, almost for free, which is amazing.
Can I come in next?
Yes, please.
I'll be very brief because we are short of time. So I endorse everything that's been said. I think the critical question for every fire department is, and this is the question we will be asking, I mentioned this earlier, why aren't you doing this? And the other piece of advice I would give to everyone was, show the politicians, because if you put that headset on the politician's head in 10 minutes, you will have him or her sold.
Sir Thomas, you still there? Sir Thomas,
Yeah.
We lost you for a second, maybe the last 20 seconds. If you want to maybe just quickly try and
sorry.
what you said.
Am I audible? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So just repeat what I said. It's only 10 seconds. Fire departments must answer the question, why aren't you doing this? And the second thing is, you've got to show the politicians. Because once the politicians get that headset on and they have a look around, in 10 minutes time, you'll have won their hearts and their minds.
Well said. And Callum?
And that's all I wanted to say.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, be very quick at building everyone else's points. Ultimately, if we carry on training the way we've trained, we'll always get what we've always got. There's a million possibilities that we can use VR for, and let's just try them. Some of them will work, some of them won't, but let's just give it a go and find out. That's what we're doing in Leicestershire. We just want to give it a go, and we'll take the good stuff and we'll move on from the bad. And if we all do that, we can share our learning, and that will be awesome. If there is a part two, I'm more than happy for us to share what we've got from the Fire Service College to show if it was good, bad, or indifferent. Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Paul?
I just think it's the way forward. I've been, as I said, I'm 31 years in fire service. I've done the training, what we do, and I can see this, as Callum says, it's not going to replace what we do. It's going to enhance it in the blended learning approach. It's just part of that learning package, and it's just the way forward. I think it'll open so many doors for people. Everyone has different learning methods, and I think this one is one way you can train people and train completely lost my track of my thought there. Sorry. You got the ability to train people in an environment where they're going to experience it, and when you experience it, it creates a memory. If it creates a memory when you need that, your brain's going to pull it out when you need it, and it's going to be there. I always remember I gave one talk and it was a PowerPoint, and the guy at the front rolled his eyes. I looked at him and went, "I'm not even started." He says, "It's a PowerPoint." I just switch off. He had to go with virtual reality, and he went, "Wow, I'm a convert."
Kevin, my final words, if you like. Bobby, touching on what you said about being a seasoned veteran, my key thing after spending the last 4 years in this world, this fire investigation crime scene world, is I want to make a big point about knowledge retention. I want to be able to have, inside our system, continuously having content being fed into a system, taking people's knowledge so that when they retire, they've got that knowledge in a system where someone can just replay it. They can be at the scene with them and go through what happened. So for me, knowledge retention.
Awesome. And I think I'll echo Sir Thomas's point of why aren't you trying this? We realize that the times are uncertain, and we need to continue to explore all different avenues to continue to improve ourselves, improve those around us. So on behalf of Darley and Smart Firefighting and River and Leicestershire and Bobby and Thomas, I want to thank you all for joining us here today. And to all the speakers, you're all rock stars. You guys are the reasons I get out of bed every morning. So thank you. And if you got any questions, feel free to email me, kevinstokman@darley.com. And I hope you all have a great rest of your Monday. Much love to all of you.
Okay. Cheers. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Take care.
How to leave? How to go out?